If that database that I had access to could see the light of day, and unfortunately it never will, but if it could, it would permanently change the face of humanity.
Well, this is going to be a juicy, juicy interview because I have so much to dig into.
Gary Brecka.
Gary Brecka is a biohacker
Human biologist,
and one of the world's foremost experts on it.
When a life insurance company is getting ready to put $10 million or $25 million worth of risk on your life, there's only one variable that matters. How many more months do you have left on Earth? The reason why people were not living longer, healthier, happier lives was not pathology, was not disease, was not some catastrophic illness that they had. It was for things that we called modifiable risk factors. And I was prohibited by law from contacting the patients. So even if I saw life-threatening drug interactions, I could not contact the patient to warn them. If I had been able to just pick up the phone and talk to that patient, I could have added on average 7 years to their health span.
Do you ever think that there could be some sort of regulation to make that data available publicly so that we could save more lives?
Young and Profiters, today we're unlocking a YAP classic that might completely change how you think about your health, aging, and what it really means to feel normal. In this episode, I sat down with Gary Brecka, a human biologist, biohacker, and former life insurance mortality expert who spent decades predicting exactly when people would die. And after seeing the same patterns over and over again, he walked away from that career to help people live longer, healthier lives instead. What Gary discovered is that most modern health issues, from fatigue and brain fog to chronic disease and accelerated aging, aren't driven by genetics at all. They're driven by oxygen deprivation, nutrient deficiencies, and the everyday lifestyle habits we rarely question. You'll learn in this episode how your body actually works and how a few practical, accessible biohacks can dramatically improve your energy, focus, hormones, longevity, and overall quality of life. Yeah, fam, let's get into it. Gary, thanks for joining us for this super important conversation, and welcome to Young and Profiting Podcast.
So excited to be here.
I am very excited for this conversation. I love talking about biohacking, and you are so experienced. And when I was doing research for this podcast, I found out that you spent 20 years in the life insurance industry, and you basically would predict when people would die to the nearest month. And first of all, I didn't even know a job like this existed. So it was so fascinating to me. How did you end up in the life insurance industry to start with?
What's amazing is how much of this science is actually done on an annual basis. I mean, there's more than $30 billion of these types of policies issued every single year. And remember, in the life insurance industry, when a life insurance company is getting ready to put $5 million or $10 million or $25 million worth of risk on your life, there's only one variable that matters. Right. I mean, and it's how many more months do you have left on Earth? Mm-hmm. And so some of the most accurate science in the world is actually held by life insurance companies. I always used to say that if that database that I had access to could see the light of day, and unfortunately it never will, but if it could, it would permanently change the face of humanity. I mean, it would upend modern medicine in a way that would be catastrophic. And I made my way there because, in my undergraduate degrees were in biology. My postgraduate degrees were human biology. So I'm a human biologist by trade. I had another concentration in neuroscience. And when I graduated, I went into this industry, I thought temporarily, to work as a mortality expert because I was just fascinated by the data. And if they got 5 years of medical records on you and 5 years of demographic data, we could tell the insurance company how long you had to live to the month.
Wow.
And, after doing this for more than 2 decades, I really began to realize that these were not just spreadsheets, right? This was not just data. There were human beings on the other side of these spreadsheets. And I was prohibited by law from contacting the patients. So even if I saw life-threatening drug interactions, I could not contact the patient to warn them.
Wow.
And it became glaringly apparent to me that the reason why people were not living longer, healthier, happier lives was not pathology, was not disease, was not, some catastrophic illness that they had. It was for things that we called modifiable risk factors. Right? I mean, if I had been able to just pick up the phone and talk to that patient, I could have added on average 7 years to their health span, not just their lifespan, but how many healthy years they had left on earth. And I decided, one day I had a massive epiphany and over a case that I was working on that they prohibited me from contacting the patient. And I just decided that I wasn't going to spend one more day of my life predicting death. I was going to spend the balance of my lifetime, trying to help people live healthier, happier, longer lives.
Yeah.
And what's astounding about that career, I always say if I was to boil that entire career down to a single sentence, it would be that the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. And nothing is more truthful than that statement. We did not find a single disease etiological pathway, not one, that did not have its roots in what we call hypoxia, lack of blood oxygen, or was not exacerbated by a lack of blood oxygen. And this includes every form of cancer, autoimmune disease, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, early onset dementia, type 2 diabetes, weight gain, water retention, hormone imbalance, all of these things because the body is in a hypoxic state. In fact, all human beings leave this planet the same way. We all die of the same thing. The definition of death is lack of oxygen to the brain, hypoxia. Only we tend to think of it as an event, right? A gunshot wound, a car, a bus, a stroke, a heart attack. But the truth is this is a predictable curve. You are either managing oxygen well or you are managing oxygen poorly. The more poorly you manage oxygen, the faster you are accelerating towards the grave. The better you manage oxygen, the less quickly you are accelerating towards the grave and all forms of pathology, disease.
Well, this is going to be a juicy, juicy interview because I have so much to dig into. There's some interviews where I'm always excited to interview guests, but there's some topics where I'm like, man, this is so interesting and nobody talks about it. And this is one of those interviews where I'm like, this is just so interesting. But before we dig into a lot of the things that you just said, because you just rattled off a lot of information that I have a lot of follow-up questions for. But let's take it back to your childhood for a minute. What was your first childhood memory of getting interested in human biology?
So I grew up on a 300-acre tobacco farm in southern Maryland, Upper Marlboro, Maryland, the Marlboro Man. Never smoked tobacco, never chewed tobacco. My parents owned the land and they leased it to a farmer to grow agriculturally. And I was an only child. And you couldn't even see another house from my parents' home. So I spent actually a lot of my time alone in the woods. I would go into the woods during the day. I would ride my bike 8 miles to my best friend's house. There was a lot of animals on the adjoining farm next to me. I got really fascinated by nature and animals, and I was always fascinated when cattle or horses or livestock got sick. And as a young child, and they would call this veterinarian out, and the veterinarian would show up and do some magic stuff, and then all of a sudden this animal would heal. And I just thought that was really, really cool. And when I got into to school, I found out in the 8th grade, I was tested as clinically photographic. For a while, they thought I was borderline savant or maybe on the autism spectrum because I had such a hyper-concentrated photographic memory, which I later, I've learned to use as a superpower. And so I naturally gravitated towards science because science is a lot of rote memorization. So chemistry, anatomy, science came very, very easy to me. I've learned to manage being clinically photographic. Now I can't read for pleasure, for example. So I don't read menus in restaurants, try not to look at street signs. Things like that, because I record all of the information that I see. But in terms of building a basis for a future in science, it was I was sort of especially well crafted for kind of a voluminous amount of storage of detailed information. And so my grade school years and my high school years were all full of science experiments. I was a super, super science geek. And then when I went to college, I chose biology as a major, chemistry as a minor, and then I took, went on for 4 more years of just human biology.
Yeah. So you talk about everybody can unlock their superhuman, and it's clear with this photographic memory, you literally are superhuman. And I thought it was very interesting to find out that there's disadvantages to you having this photographic memory. Like you were just saying, you don't read menus or read anything for pleasure because you essentially, you can memorize anything, like anything that you see, you can just memorize. That's
so
awesome.
like I don't take the Seat Back magazine out of the pocket in front of me on a flight, because 3 months later, I'll tell you where the, sales center is for a condo project in Sao Paulo, so you can store senseless information as well. But I've learned to cultivate that. I am obsessed with the human body and its form and its function. And, when I was in the insurance industry, I had access to this database of 370 million lives. And remember that insurance companies have data that no other enterprise has. No other medical enterprise, not even the federal government, the CDC, the National Institute of Health, because an insurance company knows the day, the date, the time, the location, and the cause of death for 370 million lives. We know exactly the disease etiological progression of things like statins, all forms of pharmaceuticals, narcotics, corticosteroids, common antidepressants, antibiotics. We know exactly what happens and what the impact is on mortality when people are, subjected to these kind of chemicals or synthetics or pharmaceuticals. And, if you really want to look at health trends, follow the life insurance industry, because they have data on what terminates people's lives, and they have voluminous amounts of that data. Remember, they bet tens of millions of dollars on a single risk factor.
Wow.
And so, that was naturally fascinating to me, until I really had this sort of moral epiphany about, wasting my life predicting death instead of spending my life impacting life.
Yeah. Now, do you ever think that this data would become available publicly, or that there could be some sort of regulation to make that data available publicly so that we could save more lives? Do you think that would ever happen?
Well, I think unfortunately, no. I mean, the insurance lobby is the second most powerful lobby to Congress. First being big pharma, and then right behind them you have big oil. So it's very unlikely that something that they're able to use to profiteer from in these financial services products. Because remember, there are a lot of financial services products that are based on when you're going to die. Annuities, reverse mortgages, life insurance. These are all products that are based on human mortality. And so that database is highly, highly, highly guarded by that industry. We knew, for example, in the 90s that, opioids had an addictive amyloid long before you heard about the, pain medication crisis. And we thought that they were just pain amyloids, but we realized that there was mixed in there. There was an amyloid that not only could cause a cardiac event, but also created an addictive quality, which from a pharmaceutical standpoint is a home run, right? I mean, because if I can create something that's addictive and toxic, then I can actually get patent protection and I can get become a prescriptive pharmaceutical, right? As soon as something's toxic and addictive, it's prescribed and patented. And if it's prescribed and patented, then it's covered by health insurance. If it's covered by health insurance and it's patented, you have a monopoly. And so a lot of these compounds that we put into our bodies that are seeking to reduce inflammation or to elevate serotonin or reduce the use of serotonin or elevate thyroid function are actually also designed to create dependency, reliance, and what we call tachyphylaxis, a desensitization response. And that's all built in so that they can create the longevity and the patent protection, the prescription protection of it. But the truth is, I think the second big thing that I learned in studying mortality for 22 years is that the majority of the reason why people are affected by aging, for example, and we chalk all these things up to a consequence of aging: weight gain, water retention, brain fog, poor sleep, poor focus and concentration, lack of waking energy. These things that we accept as a consequence of aging, they are not a consequence of aging at all. They are a consequence of missing raw material in the human body. Mm-hmm. When you deprive the human body of certain raw materials, certain nutrients, minerals, vitamins, amino acids, you get the expression of that disease. And then we label this as a disease and we treat it chronically as a disease, when the truth is, there are a lot of myths about how disease travels in families. So, for example, we say that people have genetically inherited hypertension. They have genetically inherited hypothyroid, genetically inherited depression, anxiety, alcohol addiction, all of these things that run in families. But what's fascinating about quote unquote genetically inherited disease is that we've mapped the entire human biome. We know every single gene in the human body, and no physician can tell you what gene causes any of those diseases. The reason why they can't tell you what gene causes those diseases, like hypertension, hypothyroid, hypercholesterolemia, hypertriglyceridemia, all of these genetically inherited diseases, is because that gene does not exist. And if that gene does not exist, then it means that those diseases do not exist. We do not pass disease from generation to generation. What we pass from generation to generation is the inability for the body to refine a raw material. This causes a deficiency, which leads to that disease. So, for example, if I was able to magically go into your body and deplete vitamin D3, okay, the single most important nutrient in the human body. If I could go in and magically deplete vitamin D3, you would eventually develop rheumatoid arthritis-like symptoms. Now, you don't have rheumatoid arthritis, but you would develop those parallel symptoms, and amongst other things, hormone imbalance, brittle bones. But if you went to the wrong physician and you started talking about your medical history and said, listen, doc, I get out of bed in the morning, my feet and ankles are sore when they touch the ground in the morning. I wake up sore and achy like I had a workout the night before. Lately, my neck is really stiff and so is my low back and it's kind of hard to make a fist. The wrong physician is going to go, you know what? And that's exactly what rheumatoid arthritis does. You have rheumatoid arthritis. I'm going to put you on a corticosteroid, an anti-inflammatory, to help you manage these symptoms. And then you start on corticosteroids. But what you don't tell the patient is that once you start a corticosteroid, you have 6 years and 1 day until you're having a joint replacement. And then as soon as you have a joint replacement, your mobility begins to reduce. So, for example, if you were a 55-year-old female, 60-year-old female, and you applied for a life insurance policy, and I saw that you had been misdiagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, even though I knew you only had a vitamin D3 deficiency, and I saw that you were put on corticosteroids, I would artificially advance your age 6 years and 1 day. I would schedule the joint replacement for you. And then after the joint replacement surgery, I would reduce what's called your ambulatory profile, how well you ambulate, how well you move. And as I reduce your mobility, I can bring in all of the diseases that exacerbate with reduced mobility. We know now, for example, that sitting is the new smoking. Sedentary lifestyle is the leading cause of all-cause mortality. And so now that I advanced those diseases that you never would have had, now you end up succumbing to a disease you never would have had because you were diagnosed with a condition that you didn't have, put on a medication that was not required, which caused a surgery that was unnecessary and led for your passing 7 years earlier than you should have passed. And I can give you hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples like this. And the truth is, there's such a paucity of understanding of basic human physiology in the majority of the medical community that we have stopped. We just don't have faith in human beings, in mankind, in humanity, and the ability of this to heal this, and how powerful frequency and how powerful basic exercise and sunlight and grounding and hydration and simple things back to the basics, how much this could entirely change the trajectory of somebody's life. There are listeners right now listening to your podcast, and I bet more than 90% of your listeners right now are walking around at about 60% of their true state of normal. They have forgotten what normal feels like. They have accepted this baseline sense of normalcy. They might think they feel great. They have no idea how good normal can feel. And the difference between where they are now and where they could be is simply knowing what deficiencies are going on in your body and supplementing for those deficiencies rather than supplementing for the sake of supplementing.
Yeah, fam, I have really exciting news. After almost 8 years of running this podcast, I finally was nominated for an iHeart Podcast Award, which is like the Grammys of podcasting. I'm heading up against The Diary of the CEO, Acquired, Earn Your Leisure, and all these amazing shows for the best business and finance podcast. I also was nominated for an Indie Pack Award. It's the first ever independent podcast and creator awards, and I was nominated for the best business and entrepreneurship podcast. I'm competing against Iced Coffee Hour and a number of awesome shows. If you want to give me the best chance of winning, I need you to go write me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, CastBox, wherever you tune into the show. And I also need you to go subscribe to my YouTube channel and engage on our videos. Help me make the best impression possible so I could take home these wins. Thank you so much for tuning into Young and Profiting and supporting the show. Hey, Yap Fam, question for you. When somebody Googles you right away, are you proud of what they see? Or would you say, ignore that, it's under construction? For 2 years, I've been there. At one point, our site didn't reflect the level we were operating at. It felt outdated, and every small update required way too much back and forth. That's why I love Framer. Framer lets you design and publish a premium professional website without writing a single line of code. It's fast. You can launch pages in minutes. You're in control, no waiting on developers, and the designs look modern, clean, and polished on any device. Serious founders know your website is your first impression, so let's upgrade it together. Learn how you can get more out of your .com from a Framer specialist, or get started building for free today at framer.com/profiting for 30% off a Framer Pro annual plan. That's framer.com/profiting for 30% off. Framer.com/profiting. Rules and restrictions apply. Young and Profiters, let me ask you something. Have you ever missed an opportunity from a potential client and felt that drop in your stomach? I know I have far too many times. When my business started scaling, calls were going to one person, texts were going to another person, and opportunities were slipping through the cracks. That's why we switched to Quo, spelled Q-U-O. Quo gives your team one shared business number, every call and text in one place. Everyone sees the history. No more, I thought you handled it. No more pointing fingers. Plus, the AI logs calls, summarizes them, and flags next steps so nothing ever gets missed. Growing teams everywhere are upgrading to systems like Quo because once you scale, your old setup just doesn't work anymore. If you're serious about building a real company, this is a foundational move. Make this a year where no opportunity and no customer slips away. Try Quo, Q-U-O, for free, plus get 20% off your first 6 months when you go to quo.com/profiting. That's QUO.com/profiting. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers.
This is so crazy. Like, hearing this information to me is almost shocking. It's overwhelming because you think about everything's working against us. It's like your health insurance is working against you. The pharmaceutical companies are working against you. The life insurance companies are working against you. The doctors, I think, have good intentions. But they don't know enough. You know, they don't understand the full picture, and they're getting taught something. And then I've got a family full of doctors. They become very cocky. Right. So they feel like, I went to school. Don't tell me what I like. Don't tell me about, natural ways to heal yourself or whatever, because medicine is good. Right. They believe medicine is good because they have to, because otherwise it makes what they do, evil. Right. Right. And doctors are having good intentions. Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. If I hit a windshield at 25 miles an hour, I want a surgeon. I want painkillers. I'm going to the ER. I'm anti-modern medicine. But when you realize, there was a 2016 Harvard University study. It was repeated again by Johns Hopkins in 2019. We know now that modern medicine, medical error, is the third leading cause of death. So modern medicine kills more people than morbid obesity and diabetes combined. And when you start to think that only cardiovascular disease and cancer kill more people than modern medicine, it's astounding. But when you really process the fact that the industry designed to prevent death is the third leading cause of death, that is just mind-blowing. If we translated that to any other industry, it would be laughable, right? I mean, if you sold home security systems and you were the third leading cause of home invasion, you'd probably be out of business, right? Or if you were a roofer and you were the third leading cause of roof collapse, probably wouldn't sell a lot of roofs. But we accept this in modern medicine, but we are excellent at crisis management, but we are terrible at biooptimization. And, there are 32,000 named diseases in the PDR, in the physician staff reference, 32,000. Nearly every single one of these can be traced back to nutrient deficiencies in the human body.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I speak on stage, I will make a bold statement and say, I will take any disease, any ailment that you or a loved one is suffering from, ADD, ADHD, OCD, manic depression, drug and alcohol addiction, poor sleep, and I will tell you exactly what raw material is missing from that person's body so that you can replace it and have that condition eviscerate.
Yeah. It's so incredible. And so you always use this analogy. Our bodies are beautiful machines. We need the right raw materials. You mentioned that D3 is a big one. What are some other raw materials that are commonly missing from people that cause disease?
This is the most important concept. If anybody takes anything away from this podcast, this is the takeaway. The most important concept to understanding really good human optimization is understanding that there's not a single compound known to mankind, not one. There's no vitamin, there's no mineral, there's no amino acid, there's no protein, carbohydrate, no nutrient of any kind that enters the human body and is used in the format that we put it in. Without exception, everything that we put into our bodies gets converted by the body into the usable form. This process is called methylation. So it's like we pull crude oil out of the ground, right? But you cannot put crude oil into your gas tank because the car doesn't understand that fuel source. Once crude oil is refined into gasoline, now the car can run because it understands that fuel source. Human beings are no different. So we put all kinds of compounds into our body. Let's take the number one nutrient in the human diet, folic acid, for example. So folic acid, for the record, is an entirely man-made chemical, right? It is a synthetic chemical. We make it in a laboratory. It does not occur anywhere naturally on the surface of the earth. You cannot find folic acid anywhere in nature. But we've been thought to believe that folic acid is a necessary nutrient. It's the most prevalent nutrient in the human diet, by the way. It's in all white flour, all white rice, all white bread, all white pasta. It's in all grains of any kind. And we don't call these foods sprayed with folic acid. We call them fortified or enriched. Let's take just folic acid for a moment. Well, we know that when folic acid enters the body, it's useless until the body converts it into something called methylfolate. Now the body can use it. Well, what if, like 44% of the population, you have a gene mutation called MTHFR? I don't want to cuss on your podcast, but it's affectionately called the motherfucker gene. It actually stands for methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase, but everybody calls it the motherfucker gene because it's MTHFR. And 44% of the population, including 44% of your listeners, have this gene mutation. Well, if you have this gene mutation, you cannot convert the most prevalent nutrient in the human diet into the form your body can use. So what does this mean? This means that the level of folic acid skyrockets and the level of necessary methylfolate declines. Now you have a deficiency. What are some of the expressions of that deficiency? Well, depending on how severe this gene mutation is, nearly everyone that has this gene mutation reports some form of anxiety. So if you either suffer from anxiety or you know somebody that's suffering from anxiety, if you ask them these three questions, you can prove very quickly that it is not coming from a cluster of symptoms in their outside environment. It is coming from their physiology. And the first question is, have you had this on and off throughout your lifetime? Most people will say yes. The second question is, can you point to the specific trigger that causes it? Most people that suffer from chronic anxiety will tell you, no, I cannot point to the specific trigger that causes it. I can be driving home from work on an otherwise innocuous day. I can be overwhelmed with anxiety. I can be at dinner with my friends and start having just these feelings of anxiety. There's your second clue that it's coming from your physiology and not your outside environment. And the third question is, if you've tried anti-anxiety medications, did they work? And they'll say no. They made me feel like a zombie. So now, how could this deficiency in methylfolate cause this anxiety condition? And is, by the way, it's the same with depression. It is the same with ADD and ADHD, which are not attention deficits at all. They're attention overload disorders. They're not attention deficit disorders. And so when you break down the physiology of what is anxiety, Well, it's an excess rise of something called catecholamines. These are fight or flight neurotransmitters. And we think that we need to have the presence of a fear in order to feel fear. That's absolutely not true, right? If you drove home tonight and you got out of your car and somebody was standing in front of you with a knife, that's an obvious, very real fear. And you would have a fight or flight response. Your pupils would dilate, your heart rate would increase, your extremities would flood with blood. But I'm here in my log cabin, and if you can't tell, I'm in Pitkin, Colorado. I'm at 10,500 feet. I could be laying in that bunk bed right there, and I could start thinking about getting eaten by a shark. Now, the chances of a shark making it 10,500 feet up into the mountains and biting me in that bed are zero, but I could have the exact same response. So how is it that I can have fight or flight response to the presence of a fear and a fight or flight response without the presence of a fear? In fact, without even the chance that that fear would come true. This is because of a rise in something called catecholamines. Deficiency in methylfolate does not allow us to metabolize these fight or flight neurotransmitters. And so they rise and fall seemingly without a trigger. And they can go all the way to the point where they trigger a panic attack. If you actually look up this gene mutation, MTHFR and anxiety, you will read hordes of peer-reviewed published clinical literature that link this simple methylfolate deficiency to these conditions. And it is the same link to attention deficit disorder, right? We've sort of labeled ADD as an attention deficit or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's not a deficit of attention at all. It's an attention overload disorder. It's too many windows open at the same time. And why does that happen? Because in the human brain, we don't just create thought, we also dismantle thought. And if you don't break thought down at the rate that you create thought, the mind gets very clouded. And now you are paying attention to too many things. It's not that you can't pay attention. It's that you can't pay attention to so many things. I mean, a lot of peace can come to these people by using the right balance of B vitamins, the right balance of specific forms of B12, and using methylfolate. That's why I think everybody once in their lifetime should do a gene test and look for 5 actionable genes. It's only a test you do once. You'll never repeat it. And once you know exactly what your body can convert and what it can't, now you supplement for that deficiency and just watch the magic happen.
Yeah. So this is pretty interesting. So you're saying in order to understand what raw materials you need or what you need to change with your body, you've got to do some sort of genetic testing. And not because you want to figure out what diseases you've inherited. Right. You actually want to figure out what genes
what deficiencies you have. So
what deficiencies you have.
So you can stop supplementing for the sake of supplementing, and you can start supplementing for deficiency. You know, the question we should ask when we're about to supplement is not what's the quality of the supplement, where was it manufactured, what's the reputation of the manufacturer or the person that's pushing this. The first question we should say is, does my body need it? Right. And then go down the road of the quality of the supplement, because there are a lot of phenomenal supplements on the market. Pure Encapsulations, Thorne, Symbiotica. I mean, these are amazing supplement companies. And the products that they manufacture, including my own at 10X Health, are products lots of people need, but not everyone needs the same thing.
Yeah.
And so once you unlock that deficiency in your body, you're on your way to a state of optimization that you never thought possible. I mean, patients or clients of mine, I'm not a doctor, clients of mine, tell me all the time, they're like, oh my God, Gary, I feel amazing. And I just remind them, you actually don't feel amazing. Not to burst your bubble. That's what normal is supposed to feel like. You just forgot how normal is supposed to feel. You just forgot how good normal feels.
It's so incredible. So I recently interviewed the CEO and founder of 23andMe, and I see this whole movement of medicine just going D2C, right? Everybody's just going direct to consumer. Have you ever met and Wojcicki. I'd love to introduce you guys because I think you guys, I think that she would be amazing for you to meet because you guys have so many similarities in terms of the outcome and the goals that you guys have.
Yeah.
But you came from totally different like angles in terms of how you got there. So I think you guys would have an awesome conversation.
I'm a big
so I'm
fan
definitely going to introduce you.
Yeah. You do also get a lot of what I call non-actionable information, right? So if I see that you have olive skin or detached earlobes or you're, Irish ancestry, there's not a lot you can do with that information. You want to make sure that you look at actionable genes, right? Meaning genes when they're broken that you can supplement for their deficiency. That's when really magic happens in the human body. A lot of the rest of that information is just data. It's good data, but the fact that you have brown eyes and olive skin and detached earlobes is there's nothing you can do with that information. But you can find it in your genome, right?
Yeah.
We want to know, hey, what can my body metabolize and what can it not metabolize? And then how do I give it that nutrient? Because when you give it that nutrient, this is when real magic happens. And if you look at some of the cases that I'm very popular for, like, Dana White and some of these other, fighters and boxers and athletes, it's amazing how little supplementation made such a massive impact on their performance.
It's so fascinating. So I want to talk about oxygen. Because I know that oxygen is a really important topic. Like you mentioned earlier, the definition of death is hypoxia, which is a lack of oxygen to the brain. And you also mentioned that if you could boil your entire career down into one sentence, it would be that the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. So talk to us about why oxygen is so important.
Well, obviously we all know about breathing, right? We can't go very long without breathing, but it's more important than that. We know that aging, aside from being the aggressive pursuit of comfort, is a mitochondrial disease. So inside of every cell in your body, you have thousands of these little motors called mitochondria. Human beings are not powered by the air we breathe, the water we drink, or the supplements we take, or the food we eat. We're powered by one energy source. It's called ATP. And this adenosine triphosphate is made in a battery inside the cell called the mitochondria. And inside the mitochondria, there is a motor, right? It is spinning around and it's creating this energy. Well, every time this motor makes one revolution, it has two choices. It can either create 2 units of energy, 2 ATP, or it can create 36 units of energy. Same turn. It's either 16 times more powerful or 16 times less powerful. It's a really hard concept to grasp. It's like walking onto a car lot and the salesman says, hey, there's 2 choices here. It's the same car. It comes in a 1600 horsepower version or a 100 horsepower version. 100 horsepower is like a lawnmower, and 1600 horsepower is like a professional NASCAR, right? And so this is what's going on inside the cell of our body. 10% of your body weight, by the way, is mitochondria. You have 110 trillion of these in your body. Wow. Anything that downregulates the mitochondria or harms the function of the mitochondria accelerates aging and makes fertile ground for all forms of pathology and disease. So now we're kind of inside the cell, inside the mitochondria, talking about this little motor called the Krebs cycle. I'm probably boring half of your listeners to death, but
no, I don't think so. Okay, I do not think so.
Because if we're going to talk about aging and performance, we have to talk about mitochondrial function, right? We know that the dysregulation of mitochondria is linked to every form of disease and pathology in the human body, including Alzheimer's and dementia. And, there's so many myths about these diseases. For example, we know that Alzheimer's now is not Alzheimer's disease at all. It's type 3 diabetes, right? The big lie, the big myth about Alzheimer's is that patients are losing their memory. That's actually not true. They're losing access to their memory. And the access to this memory is disabled in large part because of down regulation in the mitochondria. So we know that this mitochondria can produce 16 times more energy or 16 times less energy. So what determines whether or not it's 1600 horsepower or 100 horsepower? The presence of oxygen. If oxygen enters that cycle, it creates 16 times more energy. If oxygen doesn't enter that cycle, it creates 16 times less energy. And so here is where the importance of oxygen comes into play. And when you start talking about, well, how can I better manage oxygen? Well, I'll give you some free ways to do it right now. And all this is doing is getting back to the basics, right? So if you've ever heard of earthing or grounding, right, which is where you take bare feet and touch bare soil. And think about that. If you're, listening to this podcast, think about the last time that you had bare feet touching bare soil. I mean, like dirt, grass, sand. Okay, that was the last time that you actually discharged into the earth. Human beings, we build up a charge in our body. We all know about the acid alkaline scale. Well, pH stands for potential hydrogen. It is a charge. If you want to change the pH of the body, you don't drink alkaline water. That was the biggest marketing myth ever sold to the public. You cannot make the body alkaline by drinking alkaline water. If you want to make the body alkaline, you change the charge. How do you change the charge? You run a low Gauss current through the body. There's two ways to do this. There's a way that you can pay for, and there's a way that it's free. If you want to pay for it, you buy a PEMF mat, pulse electromagnetic field, right? And you lay on that mat 16 to 30 minutes a day. You just put it in your bed, and every morning that you wake up, you will wake up alkaline. It will alkalize all 32 trillion cells in your body. If you don't want to spend $5,000 on a PEMF mat, then take your shoes off 6 minutes a day and come in contact with the surface of the earth, right? Because magnetism in the earth will change the polarity in your body. It will change the polarity of the surface of every cell in the body. And what will happen is, instead of cells sticking together because they have opposite charges, they will repel because they have the same charge. Why is that important? Because if I can increase the surface area of the cell, now the cell can exchange with its environment, eliminate waste, repair, detoxify, regenerate. And this also increases the surface area to absorb oxygen from the bloodstream. So magnetism is one way to improve the oxidative state of the body. The second is oxygen itself, right? This is why sedentary lifestyle is the leading cause of all-cause mortality, because we are getting less oxygen and therefore less circulation. The majority of these pathologies and diseases too have a circulation component. So I tell people that to learn to do an 8-minute breathwork technique, I borrowed it from Wim Hof. I'm not the purveyor of this technique. He's the father of modern breathwork. If you go to my Instagram, I do tutorials on Instagram all the time about breathwork. But you can wake up in the morning. You can do 8 minutes of breathwork, 3 rounds of 30 breaths with a breath hold in between. And this does 2 things. Number one, the number one vasodilator in the human body is not nitric oxide. Nitric oxide, by the way, is toxic. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're taking a nitric oxide supplement because you're an exercise enthusiast or you're a bodybuilder or you want to be more vascular, please stop. That is toxic to the mitochondria. It actually competes for oxygen in the mitochondria. Something called cytochrome C oxidase. It pulls oxygen out and forces itself to dock. The major vasodilator in the human body is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide causes our veins to dilate. So by doing breath work and flooding the blood with oxygen and then holding our breath for a prolonged period of time and dilating our blood vessels, we actually, when we breathe in again, we get more oxygen to the tissues. We can actually change the oxygen tension in our tissues. Now, I use something called a Hypermax oxygen system, multi-step oxygen system. Again, it's about $5,000, but it's an oxygen mask. You put it on, you breathe 93 to 95% O2 for 10 minutes while you're mildly exercising, but you do not have to spend money on that system. You can learn to do breath work. And then the third thing is to expose your skin to natural sunlight. And the truth is, most of us are not getting enough sun. It's not that we're getting too much sun. And the safest time to expose your skin to sunlight is the first 45 minutes of the day during first light, because there's a very special type of light during that 45 minutes. There's no UVA, there's no UVB rays, so nothing that can damage your skin, nothing that can burn your skin. I sit out on my porch with my shirt off in a pair of shorts, even when it's cold outside. And I do 3 rounds of 30 breaths. I expose my skin to sunlight. Sunlight, certain wavelengths of sunlight, when they pass through the skin, they will go into the mitochondria. They will go into the motor of the Krebs cycle. They will kick out nitric oxide and force oxygen to dock. just by exposing yourself to sunlight. Now, I also have a red light therapy bed, and red light therapy, as you may or may not know, is the rage in sports recovery and anti-aging and healthy skin now. But if you don't want to go out and spend money on a red light therapy bed, you can expose your skin to sunlight. So those are three things your listeners could do for free starting tomorrow: grounding, sunlight, breath work, to absolutely change the trajectory of their life. The reason why most people will not do it is because it's too easy. It's because they're like, it can't be that simple, but it is. And I really try to impress upon people how these tiny little habits could completely change the trajectory of their life.
Yeah, fam. Today's episode is sponsored by Bitdefender, a global leader in cybersecurity. Now, running a small business means wearing 100 hats at once: sales, payroll, customers, taxes. And scammers know that. Especially during tax season, cyber criminals are sending fake audit letters, phony tax documents, and emails that look painfully real just to grab access to your accounts while you're busy doing 100 other things. That's why I use Bitdefender Ultimate Small Business Security to keep my company safe. It protects every employee device, secures servers with customer data, and shields daily activities like email and web browsing, whether you're in the office or working from home. And the part I think is really smart is their AI-powered scam prevention. It's trained on real small business attack patterns, so it blocks phishing, fake websites, and shady messages before they ever reach your team. Plus, you also get a password manager, unlimited VPN, and 24/7 expert support in one simple dashboard. Big companies have security teams. You don't. Bitdefender fills that gap for you. Start protecting your business today with Bitdefender Ultimate Small Business Security. Get 30% off your plan at bitdefender.com/profiting. That's bitdefender.com/profiting for 30% off. What's up, Yap Gang? We're still at the start of a new year, and you know what that means. New goals, new ideas, and maybe that little voice in your head saying, this is the year that I finally start my business. But let's be real. The what ifs show up fast. What if I fail? What if this is the wrong move? I've been there, and what I learned is this. It makes a huge difference when you have the right partner from day one. And for many entrepreneurs, that partner is Shopify. Shopify is an all-in-one commerce platform that helps you build, run, and grow your business. You can create professional-looking websites with ready-to-use templates, manage payments, and even use AI tools to write product descriptions so you can launch faster. What I love is how simple it makes everything. You don't need to be technical. You don't need to have it all figured out. It just lets you get started. Yeah, fam, don't kick yourself a year from now because you didn't take action today. Start your business on Shopify. It's time to turn those what ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/profiting. Again, that's shopify.com/profiting, shopify.com/profiting.
This has been such valuable information. And so I interviewed Wim Hof on this podcast. He's
awesome.
Incredible.
I'm Wim Hof certified. I'm going to the Pyrenees Mountains with him this year.
Really? He's awesome. Yeah, I loved him. He was an inspiration. And so something that is new news for my listeners is I am going to get my deviated septum fixed because after Wim Hof came on the show, I never was able to really enjoy these breathing exercises because I literally can't breathe through one side of my nose. And I feel like this is impacting my health. I'm getting sick too often, all these things because I feel like I'm not getting enough oxygen. So I never thought I was going to go under and get a nose job or whatever. But now I'm just like, you know what? I'm getting it fixed because I feel like one thing that could help me for the rest of my life is being able to breathe properly and do these breathing exercises.
Yeah. I would actually encourage you. I have a friend named Dr. John Laurence. He's in Sarasota. He's a chiropractor in Sarasota. He does something called a balloon nasoplasty where you actually put a small balloon in and you reshape the sinus cavities. It's outpatient. It's a 10, 15-minute procedure and no downtime. He also wrote a cranial sacral book. I forget the name of the book. I actually read the whole book and now I can't think of the title, but the the ability to open up these nasal passages and actually get more air over those olfactory bulbs close to the base of the brain and into your lungs. It is a massive difference in your mood, your emotional state, and the oxidative state of the body.
Yeah. I have to look into it. So let's talk about hormone balance, because hormone balance is a topic that I think is starting to bubble up more in society and culture. I'm seeing a lot more like Instagram reels about hormone balance, especially for women.
Mhm.
Why is hormone balance something that we need to understand more? And what are some key tips that you have to improve our hormone balance?
So let's talk about basic human physiology for a moment and where hormones fit into physiology, right? So I would say the greatest single reason why people walk through the door of one of my clinics at 10X Health is because the biggest complaint is, I just don't have the same energy I used to have. I just lack energy. My waking energy, I feel like my short-term recall is not what it used to be. And I just basically lack energy. So when you say you lack energy, if we convert that to physiology, basically what you're saying is, I'm not low on energy, I'm low on oxygen. Because everything that you perceive about energy is nothing more than oxygen in your blood. So I want you to imagine a tree for a moment. And let's start in the leaves, and I'm going to walk you all the way down into the roots below the soil. So up in the leaves, you're saying, I lack energy. So when you say you lack energy, to me, I know that you're low on oxygen. So what transports oxygen around the blood? A red blood cell and the fluid inside the red blood cell called hemoglobin. So that means I want to raise the number of red blood cells, and I want to raise the amount of hemoglobin they have. So let's move down the tree. Where do I go to get more red blood cells and more hemoglobin? Well, I go to the factory that makes red blood cells and hemoglobin, and that's the bone marrow. So now I get to the factory and I want to increase its production. How do I increase its production? Well, the boss of the bone marrow is the hormone testosterone. In men and women, the primary role of testosterone is not male characteristics. It's not deep voice, aggression, facial hair, muscles. It's none of those things. In men and women, the primary role of testosterone is to put pressure on the bone marrow to increase red blood cells. It's called erythropoiesis. So if I'm deficient in testosterone, I'm very likely deficient in red blood cells and hemoglobin. So how do I raise testosterone? I don't just start taking testosterone. I go further down the tree and I find out, what is testosterone made from? It's made from something called DHEA. And you can get your DHEA tested. If you are clinically deficient in DHEA, you will be deficient in testosterone. If you are deficient in testosterone, your bone marrow will produce less red blood cells and hemoglobin. If you produce less red blood cells and hemoglobin, you will be low on oxygen. If you are low on oxygen, you'll be low on energy. So that now let's just go right through the soil into the root. What is DHEA made from? Vitamin D3. So the first thing we want to do before we start talking about taking hormones is we want to make sure that our D3 is in the optimal range and our DHEA is in the optimal range. Because 70% of the clients that we see that are deficient in hormones do not need hormones. They need the raw material for the body to make hormones. So D3 and DHEA will raise testosterone, raise the pressure on the bone marrow, improve red blood cell and hemoglobin levels, and improve your oxidative state.
Amazing. So let's switch gears and talk about sugar for a minute. Is sugar our kryptonite? Yeah, it's our kryptonite when becoming superhuman.
Mm-hmm. So the truth about sugar is that, first of all, we have to understand that the brain, as sophisticated as we'd like to think it is, it's actually not. The brain is very primal. And you know what the brain cares about? The brain cares about survival. And the brain is kind of nasty, right? It's like the little Kim Jong-un of dictators. It sits up there. It takes everything for itself, right? If the brain wants calcium, it will leach it from the bones. If it needs amino acids, it'll strip it from lean muscle. And if it wants sugar, it will activate a receptor on the back of the tongue called the RF1A2 receptor. This is a very special receptor because things have to be swallowed to trigger this receptor. And when it passes by this receptor doesn't register sweet. It releases dopamine. And this is why most people don't just like sugar, they are addicted to sugar. In fact, the entire synthetic sugar industry, aspartame, sucralose, all of these synthetic sugars or sugar substitutes, the majority of their chemical component is not designed to taste sweet. It is designed to ding the dopamine receptor. It is designed to cause your brain to release dopamine, which gives you a pleasure response, which is why people are addicted to sodas, artificial sweeteners in sodas, which is why people are addicted to all kinds of sugar, because they don't just like the taste of sugar, they are addicted to the dopamine ding. And in the mortality space, we used to say the absence of dopamine is the presence of addiction. The reason why most addiction has a tendency to shift, if you've ever been an addict or ever known a true addict, drug addicts become alcoholics, alcoholics become workaholics become workaholics. Why does addiction have a tendency to shift? Because we never address the dopamine deficiency. If I was able to magically go into your body right now and deplete dopamine, you would begin to engage in dopamine-seeking behaviors, right? Dopamine is the primary driver of behavior. Serotonin is the primary driver of mood. So when we talk about sugars, we really have to talk about this dopamine cycle. And that's why sugar addiction is right up there with drug and alcohol addiction, right? We have increased the intake of sugar 400-fold in this country since 1964. The worst thing that ever happened to humanity was the war on fat in the 90s, and where they started to replace everything with high sugars. We know now, for example, that Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes. It's insulin resistance in the brain. So sugar is really the root of all evil.
So when it comes to sugar, then, are you suggesting that we should completely remove sugar? Is it something that we don't need as a raw material?
No, I'm just saying that we should eat, when we eat whole foods and we eat less processed sugar, this is where we get into trouble, right? So processed foods and high glycemic sugars, especially your white sugars, and these are really dangerous for you. The majority of my sugar intake comes from 3 sources: natural honeys, natural maple syrups, and fruits that end in berry. The problem with the majority of sugars is that they not only do they ding the dopamine receptor and then fall off, which makes you crave the next sugar ding, but what sugar does is it raises our insulin level. And most people think that the primary role of insulin is to lower blood sugar, and that's actually not true. The primary role of insulin is to block any other form of energy use in the body. So if insulin is high, the body cannot burn fat. So what happens when insulin is high? We store fat at an accelerated rate. The first place that fat builds up is in the blood. So people that eat the most sugar have the highest blood fat. So the heaviest people eat the most sugar because high sugar causes high insulin. High insulin forces fat storage. Your body does not have the choice to use fat as an energy source. And so one of the healthiest things you can do for a lot of my patients that are, sugar addicted, or they have high triglycerides, high fat in the blood, I do what's called a keto reset. I put them on a prescription ketogenic diet for 10 weeks. It's a very easy diet to get used to. And at the end of that, you start to reintroduce sugars and you give their pancreas a break. You make them insulin sensitive again. High levels of insulin is one of the signs of something called metabolic syndrome. And high insulin leads to another symptom of metabolic syndrome called high triglyceride. And it's so high insulin, high blood sugar, high blood fat, mild abdominal obesity. This is what we call metabolic syndrome. It's the leading cause of cardiovascular disease, which is the leading cause of death worldwide. And all of this can be traced back to sugar. And so when people say, well, what diet should I be on? You should be on a whole food diet. It doesn't matter keto, paleo, carnivore, raw food, vegan, vegetarian. You need to be eating clean, whole foods. Wild caught salmon, pasture raised chickens, free range eggs, organic grass fed meats. These are excellent sources of nutrition for you, and organic fruits and vegetables. More processed foods, especially processed sugars we have, the higher the incidence of all disease pathways.
So I know we were talking about Wim Hof previously, and one of his big core concepts is this need to make sure that we're uncomfortable, right? That we're always so used to like air conditioning and all these things that just make us comfortable, and kind of complacent. You also agree that aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort.
Yes.
The more we aggressively seek comfort, the faster that we age is something that you say.
Correct.
So talk to us about the need to be uncomfortable sometimes.
Well, there's a process in the human body called hormesis. Hormesis is a stress strengthening response. So, for example, we know that if you don't load a bone, it won't strengthen. If you don't actually tear a muscle, it won't grow. If you don't challenge the immune system, it will weaken. And so we've got to stop telling grandma not to go outside. It's too hot, not to go outside. It's too cold, just to lay down, just to relax, to eat at the very first pang of hunger. This is collapsing all of our defense mechanisms. Not to get like political or alienate half your audience or anything, but one of the worst things to happen to us during the pandemic was social distancing, residential quarantining, and masking. Those were so antithetical to human survival and our basic human physiology that we are seeing now the outcome of a global collapse of the immune system. So when you take human beings out of contact with other human beings, when you force them into their residences, when you mask them up, when you social distance them, when you don't expose them to daily pathogens, and viruses and bacteria, what happens is the immune system starts to weaken. And now you start to hear things like, monkeypox. Well, what the hell is monkeypox? I mean, I never heard of that. We're on our 8th variant of Omicron.
Oh, God.
So why is our immune system so weak? Why are we so susceptible? Because we actually stopped challenging the immune system. This is why things like cold water exposure are so good for you, right? And I know Wim Hof is a major fan of that. Remember, we're not trying to become cold adapted. We're trying to cold shock the body. So what happens, for example, when we expose the body to cold water? Well, we get a peripheral vasoconstriction. We actually get an increase in the release of endorphins like dopamine that actually give us a pleasure response. We force all the oxygen into the core, to our liver, lungs, pancreas, our kidneys, up to our brain. We activate brown fat, which is our thermostat in the body. We improve our metabolic rate. And you can do this by getting in cold water 3 minutes a day or taking a 3-minute cold shower. Now, why won't most people do that? Because it's uncomfortable. We don't like to go outside because it's too hot. We don't like to go outside because it's too cold. We like to just lay down and relax because that's comfortable. When we stress the body, it has a hormetic response and it strengthens. And so the reason why I say aging is the aggressive pursuit of comfort is that most people just, they don't, they avoid exercise or high temperatures or low temperatures or cold exposure or all of these things because they just don't want to be uncomfortable.
So as we close out this interview, Gary, first of all, I feel like I need to have you back on the podcast. And I have this, I keep thinking about having this panel of you, Wim Hof, and Ann Wojcicki, somewhere live one day, because it would be some incredible conversation. That's all I keep thinking about as you talk. I would love to close out with a few of your favorite stories of how you've basically transformed, people's lives. I know that you have a lot of celebrity clients like the UFC president Dana White, but whatever examples you want to give of how you've actually transformed people's lives through all that you work with human biology.
Well, my favorite stories are where you take a myriad of seemingly unrelated symptoms, right? So think about all these symptoms people have as like spokes on a wheel. Weight gain, water retention, poor sleep, hormone imbalance, lack of focus, lack of concentration, low waking energy, poor libido. And it seems like the whole world's going to hell in a handbasket. And what I always try to do is I look for the hub. Where do all of these things meet? So for example, Dana White just disclosed on my podcast very publicly my work with his mother-in-law. And she's a 79-year-old woman, beautiful woman, was, diagnosed with 3 very significant conditions, early onset dementia, peripheral neuropathy, and congestive heart failure. When you ask yourself, where do all of these meet, right? So the clinical team and I sit around. Remember, I'm not licensed to practice medicine, so, eventually there is a physician involved that is licensed to practice medicine. Where do all these things meet? They all meet at circulation. If I reduce circulation to periphery, I get the symptoms of peripheral neuropathy. If I reduce circulation to the brain, I get the symptoms of early onset memory loss or early onset dementia. If I reduce circulation to the heart, I get the expression of congestive heart failure. And so these are not independent of one another. They all meet at this core of circulation. So we use things like oxygen baths, hydrogen water, filtration systems for her to drink hydrogen water, resveratrol to increase blood flow, and simple raw materials and nutrients to improve the blood flow and circulation. 65 days later, after she was diagnosed with these conditions, she no longer qualified for those diagnoses. And there's so many people that are listening to this program right now that have some kind of condition going on in their body. And they've been told they have hypothyroid, or they've been told they have hypertension. And they've just accepted that diagnosis, and now they subscribe to a lifetime of medication. I would really encourage them to get that one-time genetic test done. You do it once in your lifetime. You'll never guess again on what you need to supplement with, and it could permanently change the trajectory of your life.
So most of the listeners that are tuning into the show, they're probably in their 30s, right? Mm-hmm. So where can we go to learn from you? What books do you have? What websites do you have? What services, products? Like, how can we further work with you to learn from you on how to optimize our bodies?
Yeah. So I just started a podcast on human optimization called The Ultimate Human. Dana White was a guest on there. You'll see Stephen A. Smith, Steve Harvey, Steve Aoki, lots of Steves. And you'll see lots of average patients, but I also interview the leading PhDs and MDs and researchers in the world on biooptimization, longevity, optimal health. On my Instagram, I don't do anything but teach. So if you just go to @Gary Brecka, just my first and last name, you'll see tons of videos on breathwork, morning routine, cold plunging, oxygen, light, magnetism. You'll see all of the different topics that I lecture on. I put all of my stage talks onto my Instagram. And then finally, you can go to 10x, the number 10, the letter X, healthtest.com and order that gene test. You can see the supplements that I've manufactured myself. And I have tons of information on that site on biooptimization.
So the last two questions I ask all my guests are the same. And then we do something fun at the end of the year. So the first one is, what is one actionable thing our young and profiters can do to become more profitable tomorrow?
Find something that you would otherwise do for free and monetize it.
And what is your secret to profiting in life? And this can go beyond business, financial, but what is your secret to profiting in life?
My secret to profiting in life is really kind of aligning my purpose with my passion. I'm passionate about the human body and human physiology, and my purpose is to change the face of humanity. And because those two are so aligned, I know this sounds so altruistic and cheesy, but it's true. I don't feel like I work a day in my life. This podcast did not feel like work. I really enjoyed this podcast. I mean, and when I get off the phone, I've got a dozen calls lined up with clients and patients and my clinical team, and none of that feels like I'm excited to get off of this podcast and get on those calls. So I feel like most people have a passion. Some people have a purpose. If they don't align their passion and their purpose, then what really lights your fire and wakes you up in the morning? What would you otherwise do for free? And then when you have a purpose, like, which is, by the way, linked to longevity, all of the blue zones in the world isolated the fact that the elderly people still felt like they had a purpose. So when you have a purpose, meaning, mine is to change the face of humanity, this information that I have does not belong to me. It belongs to your listeners. It belongs to mankind. I'm just blessed enough to have it flow through me. And since I'm so almost psychotically passionate about the human body, and I read voraciously and I study voraciously, and my purpose is to touch the face of humanity, those two aligned. And I'm telling you, it's like, I feel like I won the lottery every day.
Yeah, I can feel the passion through you, and I'm totally aligned. I totally agree with everything you're saying. And Gary, you've been a wealth of information. I can't wait to have you back on the podcast. Thank you so much for your time. Where can everybody learn more about you and everything that you do? What are your main channels?
At my Instagram, at Gary Brecka on Instagram.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Gary.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me on.